Today we're going to be looking at holding the Sten gun by the magazine and whether or not it can actually cause a jam. You might have seen in some videos of people shooting full auto Stens holding the gun by the magazine well and seeing people comment in the comment section. Now you shouldn't do that, you're going to break it or you're going to jam it. Well, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to ruin it right now for you. The short answer is yes, that you can potentially in the right circumstances jam the gun by holding it by the magazine. We're going to look at my semi-auto Sten here. It's obviously semi-auto instead of full auto, but the principle is the same. So I'm going to take it down real quick so we can take a closer look. Okay, so I just removed the springs to make the gun a little easier to handle. So there's a couple spots where loose tolerances on the Sten could cause a jam if you hold it by the magazine. It starts in this charging handle slot here. This is my semi-auto build, and I took a lot of time to make everything as precise as possible, so there's not much wiggle here, even though that looks like a lot of wiggle. A full auto wartime production Sten has a lot more. So in a perfect world, the bolt moves straight in and straight out, and there's no wiggle like that. If there is wiggle, when the bolt comes forward, turn on my light here, when the bolt comes forward, the ejector here, moving between the bolt feed lips, is able to center it. Let's see if I can get this here. So if the bolt's a little bit off, this kind of controls how much it can actually wiggle, because it can't wiggle out of that range. If that ejector there is installed crooked, when the bolt gets to it, it might actually change the bolt's straight path and tilt the bolt down a little bit. And I'll show you here in a minute what that could do. One of the other sources of excessive play in the Sten is the pivoting magazine housing. So this plunger locks into a hole, and those tolerances aren't always perfect, so it has a little bit of side-to-side wiggle. It's not much of an issue compared to some of the other things, but if it was severe enough, if you insert a magazine, I'm going to try to hold the magazine still inside the magazine well. It's almost impossible to see in this gun because it's not too bad, but you can see the distance changing between this feed lip and the ejector when I wiggle it. It's very little, but it is a possibility. Magazines being loose in the actual magazine well is another factor that could potentially cause a jam. You can see how much it moves. Let's try another magazine. They're all pretty much the same. But when you look on the other side, here's where it could become an issue. So, when you hold the gun by the magazine on this side, the weight of the gun causes the magazine and the magazine well to go like this. Now there's kind of a spring-loaded action here, because the mag release has this little catch right here that pushes up on the magazine and kind of keeps it centered. But when you hold the gun by the magazine, you can see the feed lip is no longer centered between the ejector right there. So let's see if I can show you what happens when the bolt comes forward when it's like that. You can see it can't come all the way forward because, let's see, kind of a tricky maneuver here. You can see the bolt feed lip is impacting the magazine feed lip, and that's what causes your jam. But if you don't have any pressure on it, the spring in there pushes the magazine up to a more natural position, and the bolt can easily move in and out. So this particular magazine I flagged because it actually caused an out of battery. There's the shell casing that kind of blew up in my face. So this is a semi-auto, so when I was firing with this magazine, just because of the loose tolerances or the closed feed lips on the magazine, when the bolt came forward, because this fires from a closed bolt, the bolt was coming closed and it stopped right in there. I didn't realize that the bolt wasn't all the way home, and this doesn't have a firing pin safety, so when I squeezed the trigger, it detonated the round, and it was probably more like actually somewhere up here, but the friction between the bolt feed lips and the magazine feed lips is enough to slow the bolt down. If you have a full auto gun, where when the bolt's released with the fixed firing pin and it flies home, it's just going to jam right there. If there's some other obstruction, it could cause an out of battery, but most likely it's just going to stop, slow down, and then the round that's being pushed forward might just go crooked, or it might jam up, or just the gun's basically just going to stop moving. Okay, so that's pretty much all the issues on the Sten's end. The other issue is the actual magazines themselves. That could be a potential issue. So I got a few magazines right here to show you the difference between the feed lips. And you can see how much they vary. So this was the Troublemaker magazine. You can see how narrow and shallow the feed lips are. This one looks pretty good. Deep feed lips, and they're wide. And this one looks like the feed lips are wider but not as deep. So out of all these three magazines right here, I would probably use this one. And just to show you how widely these magazines vary, I'm going to show you a quick little clip animation of a number of magazines and how their feed lips vary. So is it really an issue to hold the gun by the magazine? With my semi-auto, I wouldn't let anybody shooting it do that. In fact, I had this out of battery and I wasn't even touching the magazine. So you can see how easily it could happen, even with a magazine that was just slightly less out of spec than this one. With the full auto Sten, the worst that's probably going to happen is the bolt's just going to stop right about there, and nothing's going to happen. If you were in a war, that'd probably be a bad thing. But in reality, with the full auto Sten, the magazines are cheap and the bolts are cheap. I mean, you don't want to intentionally damage the gun or the magazines. It's probably already a bad magazine to begin with if it's jamming the gun, or it could be another one of these issues that I showed you here. With my semi-auto bolt, I don't believe this is a case-hardened bolt or anything. So if that repeatedly happens on this gun, it could damage the bolt feed lips. I'm not too concerned about the magazine as much as the bolt feed lips here. With the full auto Sten, they're pretty tough. You're probably not going to damage the bolt feed lips. You might damage the magazine, which you can kind of bash back into shape. And they're cheap magazines. You can fix them pretty easily with a Dremel or whatever else, a file or something. But as far as in a war or something, I probably wouldn't want to do anything that could potentially make the gun run less reliable. So that's my little presentation on holding the Sten by the magazine. Hopefully it provides some info to people who might have heard that mentioned a few times in comments or conversation. Thanks for watching.